So just winding down after a 40-minute steady state. That is my second 40-minute steady state in as many days. So the first time I've done 2 longer aerobic rows back to back in quite a while. So I'm pretty happy with that. You know, it's gonna be helpful if I get to the place where I can do loading day, rest day, loading day, rest day, or even a loading day, rest day, loading day, rest day, loading day, rest day. Follow along with that 2 times fast. Rather than just doing kind of the loading day, recovery day, loading day, recovery day. All right, so, you know, if, you know, that the kind of up, down kind of structure is gonna be good if you're just kind of recreational and don't have any aspirations for a competition, but it's gonna be hard to get into good competitive shape if you're doing just loading, rest, load, rest. Just because it'll take a while to get the work in that you want. So I'll experiment with that. I'd like to hop into some races this winter, but something I was thinking about going through that that I wanted to kind of chat with you guys about was heart rate. And so I'm sure you guys have kind of noticed that I've got the heart rate strap on when I'm rowing, and I do kind of stay aware of that heart rate and glance at it every once in a while, but there are so many myths out there about heart rate training that it's really almost does more harm than it does good, in my opinion. And I've definitely even known a lot of my athletes that have gone to the college level and they've kind of reported back to me about some of the heart rate stuff that they're doing with their coaches, and it's just not good. It's just based on a lot of bad, you know, kind of Cosmo ab workout level training information. And so I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit with you guys today to kind of help debunk some of those myths. And I'm not going to dive into exactly how you should be training with heart rate all the time, because that is a long and detailed discussion. I'm going to move inside because it's a little chilly out there. But there are some things that we can at least kind of dispel to kind of help prevent you from going down the wrong road. And the biggest one of those is that there is no defined heart rate zones for all people, all right? And so you'll see a lot of talk either about zones in a 130 to 150 as a low end aerobic, and then a 150 to 170 as a higher end aerobic, and then maybe 170, 180 as an anaerobic side of your threshold. You know, 180 to 190, you know, maybe as your transport, as your oxygen transport, you know, and then up around 95%, 100% of max, maybe for kind of like your racing lactate. And it just does not work that way. You know, one, there's such a huge range of heart rate patterns and tendencies that you will find in a population of people that you definitely can't break them all down into the same zones. And so, you know, if you're reading a book and you're like, this book says that I should be, you know, 140 average heart rate for the session, then that book is leading you astray, or at least it has like a 95+% chance of leading you astray. All right, so essentially it has a 5% chance of actually happening to have talked about the population that you fall in. But for myself, if I trained, you know, in the way of those books, then I would never really get any good UT2 training in, any good aerobic training in. I would spend way too little time at a U1 training zone, and probably starting to level out around the AT training zone, but probably also a little bit too little. And then transport, I'd definitely be overtraining based on those heart rate zones. And so for me, I will race and I'll generally tip into the low 190s, maybe even the higher 180s when I'm racing. I've had teammates that went on to make the US national team that did their steady state in kind of the 110s, 120s, and raced in the 150s. I coach athletes, and I see this in a lot of youth athletes, coach athletes that will do their steady state in the 180s. And it's not because they're working too hard. You know, that's BS. And a lot of people are like, they're training at a transport pace. And no, they're not training at their 2K race pace for 60, 90, 120 minutes, all right? It just doesn't work that way. And so if someone was looking at just the heart rate, they would say, well, this person is working at 90% of their maximum heart rate for this 90 minutes of steady state. No, they're not doing that. They're just a person who has a higher than normal heart rate profile. And so the other thing that people don't talk about a lot in text is what's called cardiac drift. And so cardiac drift is a natural elevation of your heart rate with time. And so if you're working the same effort for an extended period of time, your heart rate is going to gradually increase without any increase in effort or lactate accumulation. It's just a kind of a marker of time and kind of residual fatigue, all right, of the system. So that if you graph your heart rate over any period of time, it's going to give you this slope, all right? So that slope, so if I'm doing a 60-minute steady state, it's not going to be just this straight line if I'm holding the same speed the whole time. For the steady state, what's going to happen is I'm going to come up and then I'm going to gradually increase over the course of that 60 minutes and then I'm going to come down. And if it was 90 minutes, 120 minutes, it would still come up and it would have this gradual increase, and it would have your little blips for when you stop for getting water, and then it very quickly comes back up to where it was before, and then it continues with its steady increase. And so the slope of that line is your cardiac drift. And if you were to take those narrowly defined heart rate zones that people are going to give in a book, or I'll see some coaches will assign to their athletes, then if you're doing long aerobic training, which you should if you want to be a competitive, high-level competitive athlete, your natural cardiac drift is going to take you out of that zone after 60, 90 minutes, all right, and maybe even less. And so it's just another reason not to kind of use those kind of narrowly defined, universally applied zones. And so there are other effects on your heart rate as well. And so if anybody straps a heart rate monitor to themselves and they're in the middle of a workout and they're paying attention to that heart rate, just start thinking about kind of the most intense race situation you can imagine without changing your rhythm or your pace of rowing. If you look down after about 30 seconds, you'll notice that your heart rate has jumped up. And so there's a psychological component to what your heart rate is as well. All right, clearly the mind isn't going to suddenly create cardiovascular fatigue. It's simply just kind of, it's causing your heart to kind of race because you got a little bit of adrenaline, because mentally you're thinking about something that's exciting, and so that's going to affect the heart rate. If you have a full bladder, that's going to affect your heart rate, all right, because the bladder, there's more blood going to your bladder, and therefore the heart has to work harder to get the blood to the other parts of the body. If you just ate a meal, your heart rate is going to be higher than normal, again, because you're getting a lot of blood flow to the stomach to help with digestion, and the heart is going to have to work a little extra hard to get the blood other places. If you did not get a lot of sleep the night before, your heart rate is going to be higher for the same amount of effort, because you're going to be fatigued and the heart is going to have to work harder for the same amount of work that it would be if you had gotten a great night's sleep. If you are stressed, stress is going to cause mental fatigue, all right, separate from just thinking about something that's anxious, like a race situation. But if you are just stressed out, if you're stressed out at work, if you're stressed out in your relationships, if you're stressed out with your performance, that's going to elevate your heart rate. And so you have all these factors that are going to come together to affect your heart rate. And so if you're just using these narrowly defined heart rate zones to dictate your training, you're going to habitually overtrain or undertrain depending on kind of how your heart rate works. And chances are, from what I've seen observationally, you're probably going to undertrain, all right? Because especially a lot of athletes tend to work in a higher heart rate profiles. And if you're working below that heart rate profile, especially on steady state, you're going to be in a UT3 zone. And UT3, as I talked about in my steady state video, is not an effective training zone for rowing. For rowing requires a high power per stroke at a low stroke rate, and if you're doing it right, that's going to put you in a UT2 zone. All right, I had to scoot outside real quick because my girlfriend just got home, But continuing on the heart rate. So the question then becomes, well, how do I train with heart rate? And heart rate is immensely valuable, all right, but it's not easy to use. And essentially the way that you want to train with heart rate is you have got to strap a heart rate monitor to you, and you've got to train in your known energy zones for a couple months, and then you've got to track that data, and you've essentially got to extrapolate your heart rate zones from the median training heart rates that you're seeing in all of your training sessions. And so you need to get in, a couple dozen, sessions, definitely of steady state, and maybe a half dozen or so sessions at either an AT or transport, and track the heart rate trends that you're seeing in those workouts, and then use those to give yourself a guideline for your training sessions in the future. And then you just want to kind of continually compare against the baseline. The other extreme value that heart rate has is that once you have an idea of your baseline, you can use it as part of what I would call a 3-point check for your training health and your training status. And so that 3-point check is going to be your power output as measured by your split per 500 meters, your rate of perceived effort, so how hard you are working, and the third one is your heart rate. Now, if your training and one of those is off, then you're probably just having an off day. So if you're training, your effort is the same, your heart rate is the same, but your split is just a little bit slow, then you're just having an off day. No big deal, keep rowing. If your effort is a little high, but your heart rate is where it should be, and your split is where it should be for the heart rate, then you're fine. Just keep training, you're having a bad day. If your heart rate is just a little bit high, but your split and your effort seem just fine, then again, you're just having an off day. So keep training. That's probably one of those days where you're just, you're stressed, or maybe you didn't sleep as much, or, you just ate, or maybe you got to go pee, whatever it is. All right. So if one of those 3 points is off, no big deal. You can go through it. If 2 of those points is off, you need to evaluate, all right? Chances are you need to kind of change the plan, call an audible, and make an adjustment, maybe come back, the next day after a little bit more rest and continue whatever you're doing, all right? So if I hop on an erg and my heart rate is high and my effort is high and my split is where it should be, so I'm essentially working harder than I should, by a significant margin to hold that split, then I have a little warning sign, and I can decide, based on, just my intuition of whether I'm going to push through that or not. But generally, it's a better idea to rest. If I'm in there and my split is high and my effort is normal and my heart rate is high, again, a little bit of a yellow flag. I want to be cautious and make a decision whether I want to push through. If you sit down in a session and all 3 of your markers are high, so if you sit down, your split is higher than you're expecting, your effort is higher than it would be normally for that split, and your heart rate is high, then you need to stop. You're probably getting sick or something is wrong, all right? I like this a lot because your body starts to fight an infection usually about 12 to 24 hours before that's the results of that manifest in your daily activity, all right? And so you're fighting a cold for about 12 to 24 hours before you start to get symptoms of a cold, or you start to feel kind of like, lethargic or tired or runny nose or sore throats. But your heart rate is a sign that your immune system has been activated, all right? And it's drawing energy from everything else. And so if you hop into a training session and all 3 of your markers are off, something is wrong, you need to stop and you need to rest, all right? And you just need to wait and see what comes about as a cause of those markers being high. And so this is really good because normally, if you weren't paying attention to those markers and you were just like, oh, my split's a little slow and I'm working a little hard today, you're like, oh, I'm just having an off day, and you're gonna push through. And so by pushing through, you're gonna be drawing a lot of resources away from your immune system, and you're gonna compromise your immune system's ability to preemptively fight that infection. And so you're essentially gonna lower the gates to your walls and allow the enemy in, all right? And so you're gonna make it easier for that infection to lay hold and set, and for you to get much sicker. And so that is one of the biggest things for heart rate. And then the last is that you can just use heart rate to measure progress. And so we talked about the slope of your cardiac drift earlier. The lower number, or the lower that slope is, or the less steep that slope is, the more fit you're gonna be. And so for me right now, my heart rate, my cardiac drift is certainly gonna be steeper than what I would expect it to be 2-3 months from now, all right? And so my heart rate is just gonna drift up at a higher rate when I'm less fit than when I'm more fit, all right? When I'm more fit, I'm just gonna be able to go at the same effort for a longer period of time, and that heart rate is just gonna increase at a slower rate because I've got better oxygen utilization. And so you can pay attention to that heart rate drift there. And then you can also just look at, especially on your anaerobic work, anaerobic improvements come in very small increments. And sometimes it's 1/10 of a second here, 1/10 of a second there. Maybe you're going the same speed with less stroke rate or with a lower drag. But you can also say, well, I did the same numbers, but my heart rate was 3 beats lower, 2 beats lower per interval on average than it was the last time I did this. And so it gives you another way to recognize that your training is or is not effective, and then you can adjust appropriately based on that information. So definitely went longer than I thought for just kind of a few debunking heart rate myths, but if you're interested in heart rate, at least that gives you a place to start and hopefully steers you away from kind of buying into whatever kind of the cookie cutter nonsense is that you might read in a magazine or an oversimplified book. Main thing is everybody's heart has a different profile, and so you need to put in the time to learn what yours is by gathering data for a couple months and then reviewing that data to find a guideline for yourself and for your training moving forward. So I hope that helps. This is something I'm really passionate about just because it's infuriating to see all the bad information out there, and I would love to kind of help you guys avoid the pitfalls that a lot of other people fall into with heart rate training. So if you have questions about that, please shoot them in the comments. I am happy to answer them and try to get as much information out there as possible. And that's it for today. Thanks again for following along. Share this with your friends if you found it helpful. I'd really love to kind of spread as much knowledge as I can in the rowing community to help as many people as possible. So thanks, signing off, and we'll catch you on the next vlog. Bye.